Oh, this is really hard, she said, so I did.
Do the red light one?
Yeah, the red light.
Great.
Which in this case means go. Yellow means speed up, red means go. I'm Sue Martin. I'm an adoptive parent of a son now 19, adopted in what is termed a matching white infant placement. We find we have to make these distinctions because there are so many different kinds of adoption. David was placed with us at seven days. I should say placed with us. I mean, it was a private adoption. We went to the hospital and brought home this bundle when he was 7 days old. We've been through a lot of fun times since then, especially most recently. I would say probably starting at 12 or so. Anyway, we've lived through it so far. Karen is an adoptive parent. You tell them, Karen.
My name is Karen Gore. I'm an adoptive parent. I have 2 children who are placements which we call special needs children. Both of my children came to me at an older age. My son was placed with us at age 6, my daughter at age 4. With my son, we have an open adoption. With my daughter, we do not have an open adoption. My son came to us after having, at 5 that we know of, different foster care placements. My daughter came to us from disruptive adoptive placement.
And we're here to talk about reality as opposed to fantasy. Way back there on that blackboard is an adoptive family. And you'll see there's mom and dad up in the top, and the circle is the immediate family. And you see their parents, the grandparents in this adoptive family. And then also outside of the circle is the birth parents of each of those 2 adopted children. And I want to make the point that we have maybe failed to make and hadn't made to adoptive parents before, that whether those children ever see their birth parents, or whether they ever hear from them, or they ever have a letter from them, or talk to them on the telephone, they are real. And they are real to those children particularly. So that I think much of the time we run into adoptive parents who would prefer to think that somehow those people have ceased to exist and that they have replaced those birth parents. Our law, even in the state of Illinois, states that that's the purpose of the law, is to permanently sever all biological ties. Well, gee, you just can't do that. The law sometimes bites off more than it can chew. It can't be done. And if you try to do that, you will have children who start to create fantasy parents, and they will fantasize all kinds of things about their parents. They're good people, they're bad people. On a good day, maybe they're princesses and princes, and on a bad day, they're terrible, bad lady people, and I'm going to turn out to be an awful person too. And I think usually in fantasy, the birth father generally gets characterized as the bad guy. At least it certainly was that was the case for our son. Anyway, he was the jerk who didn't stick around. And if he had stuck around, I'd still be in my family of origin. We're talking about this. I know that they said in the program that this is Few Rose Gardens. That was one of the alternate titles that we had looked at. We had thought we had changed it to Great Expectations, which is what we feel it is. It's Great Expectations. When you enter into an adoption, the adoptive couple have great expectations about what it's going to be like. And the adoptee has expectations, particularly when it's an older child being placed. They have, well, at least they can verbalize their expectations. Expectations, I think, begin even earlier than that. They begin with a couple who are getting married, or even before that. When I was growing up, I think most of the girls play with dolls. A lot of the boys do too. You expect that you're going to be a parent and that you're going to do what everybody else does and get married and have your children and live happily ever after, whatever. So for those of us who cannot conceive children, like myself, that's an expectation that doesn't get met. But then you, I think in our case at least 19 years ago, it was very easy to go immediately from that problem, and it was, I think, I did mourn that very deeply. I don't think my husband mourned it very deeply at the time. He was looking for a solution, so we adopted. then comes the expectation. All parents, even if they're natural parents, have expectations of what their kids are going to be like, how they're going to grow up, how their family's going to be. And I think we have a Norman Rockwell kind of an image of the Thanksgiving table and Grandma and Grandpa and everybody all around. And in an adoption, you have to adjust to the reality that this is not your genetic child, that you will never see your genetic child. And these are constantly coming up to you. I think these are expectations that are constantly not being met because it's different. The challenge is to make different okay too. The grief work, I think, for the infertility is very different. It's on a different time frame. Just as we find that male adoptees search so much later, usually, than females do, the timing of thinking about your infertility is different. I really think that my husband's realization of how different adoption is has only been relatively recent. I know initially one of the first conferences or things that Leo and I went to was a social worker, Frank Rule, in New Trier Township, who was presenting a paper on the trauma of loss to the adoptee. And I don't think his paper was real good. He didn't really prove it by his paper, but I did agree with what he had to say. He was talking about teenagers that he was seeing as a social worker at New Trier Township High School here in Illinois, and their recurrent dreams of loss of teeth, of dismemberment, of having parts of their body being taken away or missing. And he was connecting that to these were teenagers who had been adopted as infants and removed from their mothers as infants. And he was connecting that with the feeling that it was a symbiotic, a trauma during the symbiotic stage where the adoptee was not aware of which part was baby and which part was mom. And it all seemed to be one individual to that infant. And so the loss was internalized in a pre-verbal level. So we have expectations of what it's going to be like to raise our family. And then we have expectations about what adoption is going to be like. And then playing into all of that is the expectations of all the rest of society about what it's like to be infertile or what it's like to be adopted or what it's like to be an adoptive family. And I found that most of that is total bunk. I mean, most of what society thinks about adoption seems to be limited to, this picture of the happy couple taking home the baby, and that takes care of everybody's problems, and the birth mother goes on, and it's the line that, was fed to a lot of us early on. I should also say that, I stand up here as, quote, expert, unquote, not just because I'm the adoptive parent of one child. I mean, certainly, I early on got very tired of having people who had just adopted a child, and they had, maybe a 2-year-old, and they were going out on a lecture circuit or something telling everybody about what adoption is like, They didn't even know what it was like to be a parent, let alone to be an adoptive parent. So anyway, we have to deal also with all of the society's ideas about adoption and what it's like. And I just thought when we adopted that was what we did. We were an adoptive family now, and I was going to tell the whole world that's what we were. That was probably not the best thing I could have done, because there are too many people who will misinterpret what that means. The school, for instance, as soon as it's in my son's record that he's an adoptee, he's looked at differently. We are looked at differently. The whole shebang. There are definitely people you just feel like you wish you had never told. In fact, one of my friends who is an adoptive parent of 2 children and had been a school teacher for a number of years before they adopted, to this day I think has never told the school system that their children are adopted and really does not want to ever discuss it. Now, the fact that they're very closed about talking about adoption anyway may have part to do with it, but she did have the experience of being a teacher and knowing how the system looked at adoptees looking for trouble or pinning trouble on that if there was trouble. It would be nice if they would look at it, and I think that there are appropriate times for anybody who is in school systems that when you have a child is adopted and you may see depression in that child. When the child realizes that being adopted, that A, not everybody is adopted, that that's unique to them, and that to be adopted means somebody didn't want you, because that's how they appreciate the fact of being placed in adoption. So you may have a depressed child. The very fact that we have such an over-representation of adoptees in special ed classes throughout the grades and in high school, I do not believe that these children are physiologically damaged or that they belong in those categories because of that. And I really think it's something that could be remediated. But you may have an adoptee who is having these feelings of depression, is having these conflicts of loyalty to birth family, to adoptive family. Even if, as I say, they've never seen them, they don't remember them. It was an infant placement. There still is. I remember David had a little book when he was little, and it was about a robin that was hopping around trying to find who is my mom was the name of the book. I could hardly get through that book with him. I really had trouble with that book. Asking the turtle, "Are you my mom?" and the worm, "Are you my mom?" and all of this stuff, and finally finding the mother bird. "Oh, you're my mom. Of course you are." Now I started to say too that one of the early things that Leo and I went to was this presentation, and the comment was made during the presentation about adoption that all adoptive people have two sets of parents. And I could see the hackles rise on my husband's neck. David was then about 6, I guess. He didn't want to hear that. He didn't want to believe that. Of course they don't have two parents. We're the only parents for this child. Well, in our unique family situation at age 40, my husband discovered that he was adopted. So he then, of course, immediately wanted to know, who do I look like and why, and all of the questions that were there. So we have additional issues in our family, just as Karen has some interesting ones in hers. Maybe we need to hear about Karen's family a little bit too. But I'd like to say that Karen's son Jim is a great example of kind of one far end of the range of feeling that adoptees can have. But I don't want you to think that just because Jim was placed late and had multiple placements before that and had an awful beginning in life, that his issues are unique, because they're not. I think they are all adoptees' issues. And what I see in my role as Vice President of Truth Seekers in Chicago here, dealing with hundreds and maybe 1,000 by now or more adoptees, birth parents, and adoptive parents, are that even a 40-year-old adoptee like my husband searching has the same issues. So it's a blanket thing, and I think all adoptees have. They all have an issue of abandonment. And it plugs in at different times. And it may have, adoptees may have problems with separation. They may have problems with attachment. There are just some issues that are always there because you are not in your original family. And it's only exacerbated if you can't know why. And the only person that I know who can tell an adoptee why is his birth mother. I have tried to explain, but I am not the horse's mouth in this. And only she can explain. And maybe nobody can make it all right, but she can make it explainable. Oh, now we're going to hear the music again. Karen, your turn. Okay.
I'll try to do my best gospel voice for you. See if we can't get through this. Should be real interesting. Right. Where I would like to begin. Okay, I'll do as loud as I can. Where I would like to begin is to talk about where the commonality where adoption begins. And I think that there is one thing that every adoptee, every birth parent, and every adoptive parent share in common at the beginning of the adoption process, and that is loss. Adoption begins with loss. The adoptee has lost their birth parent. That is a biological bond that will never happen again in their lifetime. You are biologically bonded to the people who gave you life and to no one else ever. The birth parent has lost their biological child. And when they sign those papers, as far as they know, they have lost that biological child for the rest of their life and no longer have the right to have knowledge of that child. The adoptive parents generally are entering into the adoptive experience because of infertility, which means that they have lost any biological child that they ever would produce. The biological child that they would have produced is the expectation that we talk about, or the dream child. Call that a dream child. That's the child that you dreamt you would always have. The child with the blonde hair and the blue eyes and the long legs, who would run faster and sing better than you, and get all the boyfriends that you didn't get, when you were growing up. That child has to die. That dream has to die before you're ready to accept, to parent the child that you receive. In order for you to be able to accept that child and the child's history and the child's origins, because in the bundle or in the suitcase, whichever way your child comes, there is not one person. A whole family walks through the door, and you have to open up your door to that whole family. You can't just let one member in. They all come in anyway. And if you try to close the door, they're going to come in the windows or up to the basement, but they're going to come in with you. Dealing with separation and loss enters everybody into a lifelong process. Adoption is a lifelong process, and it is a lifelong process for every member of the triad. It doesn't end, it doesn't begin, and it doesn't end. It is always for the rest of your life from the moment that you enter the adoption process. Because you are in this process, you are going through a grief process. Everybody involved in the triad goes through the grief process. The adoptive parents have to know that they are going to live with a child who is going to go through the grief process, and you have to go through it with them. You have your own grief process to go through, they have their own grief process to go through, and there's a birth mother going through a grief process. Everybody's grief has to be identified. You cannot, the task of the adoptive parent cannot be to take away the grief. Everybody is entitled to their grief and their sorrow, and they have a right to it. And where adoptive parents, I think, run into trouble sometimes is that we feel an obligation to make everything okay. And when a child comes to us and says, I don't know what I look like, I wish I was born in your body, make that all okay. Our desire is to make it all okay, and I think that's where the denial begins. Let's pretend there was never a birth mother. Let's pretend that we weren't adopted. Let's pretend that we were always together. Let's pretend that God decided that since I couldn't have babies, he was going to have you grow in a different body, and then you were going to catch up with me later, like take a later train, right? Well, that's called denial. First stage of grief, denial. Denial comes in all stages. There's denial on the adopted child's part. I'm not adopted. My kids have done that. I'm not adopted. I always lived here. There can be denial on the birth mother's part. I need to go on with my life. I can forget about this. And she's told that a lot of times. Go on with your life now. This isn't important. And there's denial on the adoptive parents a lot of times. This doesn't make any difference. This doesn't count. We are just a family. Everybody deals with that denial. We try to pretend that the hurt isn't there. We try to pretend that there are no differences. You'll see people in a denial state. I think that in my going all through my denial and watching my family, go through their denial of differences, to say that my son and I share a common heritage. We both have Irish ancestors, okay? So my parents said, look, he looks just like Grandpa, and he does in some respects. He's got the red hair, he's got the freckles, and he's got that walk, I've got the rope by the tail type of walk. And there is that piece of claiming that says he could be one of us because we have a common ancestry. I think that's wonderful to say, well, gosh, I can share with you some common ancestry. Isn't it neat? And I could tell you a little bit about what Irish people are like. On the other hand, if they said to me, great, if you don't ever tell anybody that he's adopted, nobody will know. Because everybody always says, gosh, your son looks just like you. You know, everyone would go, gee, your son looks just like you. I guess he doesn't look like your husband, does he? No, he doesn't. He does look, but he does just look just like his mom. So if we could learn, I think one of the messages I have is to celebrate the differences. There is a genetic difference, and if we could celebrate those differences instead of denying those differences, we can begin to move away from the strong feelings that we have to deny. In entitlement in adoptive parenting, with adoptive parents feeling as though they have the right to parent this child and they are entitled to parent this child, does not have to come with denial attached onto it. You don't have to deny the birthright in order to entitle you to parent. Those are two separate things. The birth parent has bond, always will have bond. The adoptive parent never will have bond. The adoptive parent will have attachment. Attachment is not less than bond, and bond is not less than attachment. They are two different issues. They are two different things, and they are two strong things in a person's life. If that child did not have that bond, that child would not have life. And if that child did not have that attachment, that child would not grow to be a functional human being. They need both. The second step in grief is guilt. And I think a lot of adoptive parents feel guilty. I remember feeling very guilty the day that I brought my son home and I put him to bed in the bedroom that had been empty for such a long time. And everything, so this has got to be the happiest day of your life. You've brought your child home, haven't you? You know. And I picked up a little boy who had 2 suitcases and a big wheel and put his stuff in the back of my car. And it took 5 minutes to unpack him and put his stuff away. And he didn't say anything. He just kind of looked at everything, made sure it was in order. And then you have to go off to the doctor for a physical, because all kids have to have a physical on placement day. So then we took him to the doctor for his physical, and by the time everything was done for the day, we put him to bed that night. And I have never in my life ever felt worse. I felt like I had stolen something that was not mine to have that day. I put him to bed. I said, I'm glad that you're here. He certainly did not look very glad to be in my house, let me tell you. We had a long visitation period. He knew that he was coming. We had real good social work done. A lot of come and visit and leave something in the room. A lot of you're going to still talk to your foster family. I would say that the people who worked with us worked very well in preparing us for the visit. He wasn't a parachuted child. He didn't just show up. We just didn't get him one day. That sometimes happens, especially in a multiply placed child. Sometimes they move real quick. And I just felt awful that night, you know. And I thought, somebody's got to be missing this child. Somebody. 6. So he's quite verbal. He's very verbal. He was very verbal then. He's very verbal now, you know. Our honeymoon lasted, you know, I talk about the honeymoon period, hours. It was over. Next morning he told me what his rights were. Told me to call his worker if I wasn't quite sure about it. And then proceeded to tell me that he was negotiating the terms of his stay. He wore Nike shoes, Izod shirts, and he had to have a BMX 10-speed bicycle. And that was his condition on staying in my home if I wanted to keep him. You know. Guilt comes in many ways to children. The adoptee, I see a sense of worthlessness, a sense of feeling that he didn't deserve to be born, that he didn't deserve his life, he didn't deserve, and he feels very guilty that he has a life, because maybe he didn't deserve that, because maybe he wasn't good when he was born. And because he is a victim of child abuse and multiple placements, he's been multiply traumatized. And he has survivor's guilt on top of the other guilt. I lived through this, and now I have a nice life. My mom doesn't have a nice life. My sisters don't have a nice life. I have a nice life. I don't deserve it. What do they do when they're feeling guilty? What do adoptive parents live through when their children are feeling guilty? The kids will sabotage their placement. They will do everything that they could do to get thrown out the door. If they have to be the best little bad child in school, that's what they'll do. If they know that you don't like swearing, believe me, they know more. He knew more combinations of swear words than I thought possible. I thought I knew all the swear words, but I didn't know how to put them all together the way that he did. He's quite articulate when he gets on a roll. He could do swear rap, you know. So, when they're feeling guilty, they feel totally responsible. My child, maybe you could speak about David feeling responsible for his placement, but my child felt, though, he never should have told. And had he been a better provider at 2, he could steal food from the grocery store and feed himself and his mom and his dad. His parents were married. He could feed everybody at 2 because he was cute and he was quick and he could steal food from the grocery store. Had he been a better provider, maybe DCFS wouldn't have gotten their hands on him. Had he not cried when he had gotten beaten, maybe they wouldn't have found out. Had he not bled, maybe nobody would know. And he'd still be there. So he had a tremendous amount of guilt and a feeling of responsibility for the placement. Where his anger came, and that's the next stage, is that he didn't know what he did wrong in any of the foster homes to get thrown out. He had no idea what temporary foster care is. Children don't understand the child welfare system. They only know that if they can't live with mom and dad and they're taken to a shelter, they think that's where they're going to grow up. They don't know why, what they ever, can you imagine being kicked out of a shelter? I mean, they're not nice places. And when he left there and he went to a temporary foster care placement, he thought he'd been thrown out of the shelter. He figured he'd been thrown out of his home. Nobody explains anything. The police come, they take custody. This is a small child. He doesn't know what's happening. That's what they thought. They had no idea that his concept was, I was a bad boy, I got kicked out of my house. Now I got kicked out of the shelter, I must have been a bad boy, I must not have slept well here. He goes to a foster home that's an emergency care foster home that's only going to last for 90 days. He doesn't know it's the 90th day and he's leaving today. He thinks he's going to spend the rest of his life there. He leaves again. By the time he gets to me, he's had 5 of those bounces. When I say you're going to stay here, he goes, sure, right lady, give me the bicycle. So next time I move, I have a bicycle. The anger, his first anger came at the system for moving him. He didn't understand what happened. We sat down and we explained to him. And trying to get him to believe that he had not done anything wrong to leave all these places was a chore in itself. But I know in talking to other adoptees that they felt guilty for being born, for having to be placed. And maybe that's something you'd like to talk about yourself.
Well, I'll just drop that in right here. And as I say, Jim's treatment at early age wasn't the best optimum by any means. David supposedly was. I mean, he went right from the hospital right into his adoptive home, which many a birth mother was promised, and the kid didn't get that, but David did. I'd also like to say that the guilt, when you were talking about the guilt that I felt too, David's umbilical was still, it was still attached, and I had to treat it with, the alcohol and so forth. And I remember being totally torn because he had this umbilical cord, and it was the last connection with his mother. And I thought, I can't wait for this thing to fall off. And at the same time, I'm thinking, oh, it shouldn't be this way, I'm not the right mom. I'm not the mom that he was attached to. He must miss her. And feeling very ambivalent about this umbilical cord. It made that tie to her a literal tie. It was tied. But at any rate, the idea of every adoptee feeling maybe they shouldn't have been born. When David was about 5, is about the time, 5 and a half, he started to realize that to be adopted means that you were first relinquished. Of course, 5-year-old doesn't know relinquished. 5-year-old knows given away. And in fact, it had come up a little earlier in the year when our next door neighbor, who was a very precocious, very bright little boy, was sitting at our kitchen table having hot chocolate with 5 other kids. It was preschool, and it was Halloween. I know they were singing the Witches song that they had just learned in preschool. And Neil, our next door neighbor, had the floor and was pretty enthused about having the floor, and he had just lost the floor. somebody else said something cute and they were focusing on that person. And Neil, in order to gain the floor again, came up with a real zinger. So, Dave, he said, how come your real mom threw you away? Well, I told Neil he must be mistaken, and I know that that came out of his own head. His mother is a dear lady. He's a social worker. Knows a lot about adoption, and that did not come from his home. It came from Neil's own head, his own tape, as to why David was adopted. And later that day, I did talk to David about the fact that, that wasn't the case, that his birth mother did love him, and that she was not married, and she wanted him to have a mommy and a daddy, and so on. And I was totally unprepared. I was wrong. I didn't know what to say. Anyway, later that year, he came up to me and he said, I bet I was really ugly when I was a baby, wasn't I? We'd had him at 7 days. We had all these pictures. He was a beautiful baby. He had a lot of hair, which never fell out. He had beautiful golden hair. And he was a very pretty, very attractive little boy. And I said, I got out the pictures, and I said, no, you were a beautiful baby. Not just because I said so, but everybody thought you were. And so didn't seem to be good. I didn't know where that was coming from. The following day, he was back at me, and he said, I know babies cry a lot. I bet I cried all of the time. So I said, now what is this all about? I said, no, you didn't. You didn't sleep much during the day, but no napping, but you slept through the night very early. You were a relatively easy baby, really. But she didn't keep me. Oh, what I would give to have had what a lot of adoptive parents now do have, which is a letter from the birth mother, or some pictures, or some way that he could hear from her. Why? All I could come up with was, and I think a lot of adoptive parents end up doing this, you start doing really what is sex education at 5, which is very difficult to do. It's very difficult to explain these things in the terms that a 5-year-old can understand, or even their cognitive ability to comprehend any of this, because 5-year-olds do not give things away because they love them. And you really cannot communicate until they're about 7 or 8 and have any kind of a dialogue about this. So I did the best I could, I guess, and I said, well, sometimes when people get real close and they're loving one another and they're caring very much about one another, like your birth mother and your birth father, they make a baby. And they don't mean to be making a baby. They just get carried away and they're not thinking about it, and by mistake they make a baby. I am a mistake. I am a mistake. So we have spent, I don't know how many thousands of dollars, psychologists and psychiatrists, on family therapy, on working with this child who eventually became a passive-aggressive personality, to try to eradicate the idea that he is a mistake. I think we're out of the woods now. Check back when he's 32. Maybe I'll know more then, maybe not. I don't know. But he definitely felt that he was a mistake. It got a little better, I think, once we did make contact with his birth mother, and she was unwilling at first to come forward in any way. She was frightened by our contact. She said she had spent a lot of time. He was 9. She spent 9 years putting this behind her. Interestingly, she was still in the same dead-end job. She had had one marriage that lasted a couple months and was going no place with her life. Within the following year, after we did contact her, and she did say she was appreciative to know that he was okay and that we did sound like the people who had been described to her. She had gotten a better job, and she was married. She went on with her life after she found that he was okay. However, she didn't want us to tell him anything. So we didn't tell him. We didn't even tell him that we had searched for her or done anything like that, because it was indeed a rejection. We did contact her again when he was 12. At that point, she agreed to send, it was at Christmas time, and she agreed to send a photograph. By that time, she had had a child in her marriage. And she agreed to send a photograph of herself and her dog which was kind of funny. But we both have West Highland Terriers, both our family and she. So that was kind of cute. So that was a real plus time, and that was because we had her name. Yes. It's on the adoption decree that adoptive parents receive in this state, in Illinois. So we knew that we were looking for Miss Smith. No, that was her name. Yes. So we on our adoption decree says Leo and Martha Sue Martin to adopt baby boy Smith. Fortunately, it was fortunate this was a private placement because our attorneys still had lots of papers, and he still had the revocation, and he didn't know any better, so we gave it to us. So anyway, it was not that difficult to find her. It turned out to be really simple. But another issue here of blocking here, when we decided to search for her, I went around for about 3 weeks. How would we do this? How would we ever find his mother? Now let's see, we know where he was born. How do we ever do this? It was all in our vault. It had all, we got the adoption papers when we adopted him. I had read them then. I had totally blocked that he had a name, that he came with another name. Well, at any rate, it was a beautiful day, I think, when we were able to tell him he'd been out at an overnight at a friend's house, and I was pretty tired the next morning, so I had to wait till he got up, like at noon or something the next day, to tell him that I had talked to his birth mother on the telephone, and that she was sending pictures. And at first, I think the look on his face was really just, he was like, that's incredible. And then it was like, she really cared all this time. He believed it then. But my saying it, couldn't ever do it. Now, unfortunately, she has not been forthcoming since then. And he feels a lot of anger about that. She did send photographs. She did send a letter, a very brief letter, actually. It was just written on the back of a Christmas card. And it said, it was addressed to my husband and myself, not to David. And just, Merry Christmas, basically. And I hope you're okay. And she had answered some of his questions. She had said in her interview when she signed the revocation that there was some small portion of American Indian in her family, so he'd always been real curious, what tribe was it? And so I was able to tell him that was Cherokee. He liked all that, and he wanted to know if her eyes changed color when she was sad or angry. And she said, I don't know. And she asked her husband. He said, oh yeah, they do. And so did David's. So he had this connection feeling then. That was very, very positive for him. I should also say here, I'm going on a little bit long, but this was Christmas when we got this card and the pictures. And we, of course, I sent pictures of David and so forth to her. Actually, I just sent one. I sent a picture of him as he was then. And I said, if you'd like other pictures, I'd be glad to send them, because I had heard from other birth mothers that would be painful to see, all of the stages of his growing up that she had missed. He went out. It was too late to send her a Christmas card back, but he went out and got a New Year's card for her. And I think this is very meaningful because a lot of adoptive parents have no conception that their adoptee thinks about the birth family all of the time. Not just on their birthday, although they do think of it then, and it may make that day less happy for them, not just at Christmas or whatever, but all of the time. We asked one of the members of Truth Seekers once, one of our male adoptees, how often, somebody asked, how often do you think about your birthday? He said, every day. And if a day goes by and I haven't thought about being adopted, I think about that at night. I didn't think about it at all today. The card that David got for his birth mother was a Snoopy card. And on the front it said, Happy New Year, and then it said, inside it said, oh boy, 365 more days to think about you. So, they're always there. And making them a mystery does not help anybody, even if they're not such wonderful folks.
I know that I'm going to talk some more about the behaviors of anger and the behaviors of grief with you, the children, but in not having his mom be a stranger to Jim, he's never had to end his connection with his birth mother. We have an open adoption. In the time that he was placed in foster care placement before rights were terminated, his mom did come once a month for a visit. She rarely missed the visits. She was not capable of parenting him. She was, and she didn't want to, and she waited until she met people that promised to keep him before she signed a surrender. So I think that we were pretty lucky in that he came from pretty awful stuff happening to him. He was, sometimes, how you read in the newspaper about a child who's suffered some really terrible crimes done to them, and the state has rescued them, and they are now in an adoptive home. Well, one of those stories that you read was my child. And as a matter of fact, he had been through so much trauma and through so much stuff that they really thought that he might need to go to an institution to live, and he really shouldn't be placed in a family because maybe he wouldn't do well in society, because maybe he had too much damage. Maybe he was too damaged. So we had to do a little bit of fighting to get him in the first place, to say, give him a chance. Give him a chance in a home. The worst that can happen is that this home won't work out either. But he was never asked to leave a foster home. It was always that it was the end of the time for him to be there, and they made the decision the social workers or the agency made the decision that he needed to go. The last foster home said, we're keeping him until you have an adoptive placement because we don't want to see this happen anymore to this child. So we were lucky in that respect. So he was always with the same agency, which was very lucky. He didn't have to, and his social worker stayed with him and didn't quit, which is also very lucky and very uncommon in child welfare. So they were able to make a connection with his birth mom that kept her continually coming for visits. So when we were preparing to adopt him, we were able to all sit down and meet together and talk, which is helpful for the adoptive parent because there's a fantasy. I mean, part of the denial that the birth mother even exists is certainly perpetuated when you never meet her. You can pretend somebody that you've never seen doesn't exist. You can pretend somebody that you've never heard about doesn't exist. You can pretend somebody that you virtually know nothing about doesn't exist. When you sit in the same room with somebody who's telling you what their hopes and dreams are for their child, you will never forget that that person exists. Never. You will always have them. And it makes it easier for you. Not that you're never going to get angry at them. You are. An adoptive parent is going to get angry at the birth mother from time to time, just like the adopted child does. And I'm sure that the birth mother gets angry at the adoptive mother from time to time because she's got the child. In our case, that we do have an open adoption, and we also do have a birth mother that lives a lifestyle that we couldn't feel free with her coming to our home. My son did not feel safe with that. So our agency has arranged our open adoption. Each member is free to make contact at the agency whenever they wish to see the other one. And then the agency will contact the other person, and then they will come together at the agency. We don't arrive or leave at the same time so that nobody watches anybody drive off or get on what bus you get on, And so it sounds a little elaborate, but it works pretty smoothly. And they don't say to either one of us, we're going to have you come at a different time because we don't want you to see each other coming and going. They say, Karen, we have some medical records we'd like to go over with you. Would you mind coming an hour earlier and having a meeting with us, Or because my son's mother has gone on to have other children that they're dealing in protective services with, they may call her in to do some work on one of the other children with her. We are very lucky, but we are lucky because we were very careful about the agency that we chose. We interviewed with several agencies before we chose the agency that we worked with because we were not interested in denying rights, and we were interested in open adoption, knowing in Illinois, open adoption is an informal arrangement. We don't have any legal sanction on what we do. So what we do because we morally believe it to be the correct thing to do. So then you have to find an agency that believes in accordance to what you believe and hope and pray that those people don't leave and there isn't a new supervisor there because it can all end, or a new administration. So we've been really, really lucky. That doesn't stop any of this process. It doesn't stop the anger. It doesn't stop the fantasy. We talk about how sometimes adoptees fantasize that mom's Cinderella and sometimes they fantasize she's Lucinda in the mirror, It doesn't stop that. My son has stole, cold reality looking him in the face sometimes, and he'll still, we have left visits, and he's looked at me and he said, "You were this jealous woman who stole me from somebody who wanted me, and you keep me away. You keep me away. I keep you prisoner in my house." I mean, there are, with my bike, and his other piece was his own Visa card. He couldn't think of absolutely everything he needed, so he thought that if we gave him his own charge card, he'd just pick it up as he needed it. Oh, yeah. yeah. And so we got him as a gift for Christmas, a little plastic keychain Visa card. I have my own charge card. I said, "Yeah, now try to use it." He's 12 now, and we're in new stages. I mean, we've gone in and out of stages of anger. When a child grieves, they don't walk up to you and say, "Mom, I think I'm involved in a grief process here. Do you think we should sit down, discuss it, and cry together?" That's not what they do. They act it out. They have all kinds of wonderful behaviors that are grief behaviors that also look like dysfunctional behaviors, such as a child will bounce a ball for hours, bounce a ball, walk around the house bouncing a ball. Now you may find this a tad annoying. 2 or 3 hours later, that's one. And some people would say compulsive disorder, okay? This is a grief response right here. This is a grief response. And at the beginning of placement, you're going to see this because this kid's just been traumatized, just moved, And so we had a lot of rhythmic movement in our house. When he first came to live, we had a lot of riding our big wheel up and down the stairs. They'll test limits. Keep me safe. First issue, safe. And then we get these little words like, "Hey, Mom." He would be outside on his head, on his bicycle, going towards traffic. Little things, little things. See, will she live through this one? Is she going to live through this one now? We'll test every limit. Go to the grocery store, my favorite thing. Here we are, new parents. And my husband and I are very active in our community. So everybody knew when we were getting a child. Everybody knew that we were adopting. It's kind of hard when you bring a 6-year-old in. You don't pretend that you had a baby, Unless we had him stashed somewhere for a few years. But so people would say to me things like, "Are you babysitting or something? What's this kid always doing with you?" "Well, this is my son. I'd like you to meet him." And I would always just say to people, "I'd like you to meet my son." And I wouldn't go into this huge elaborate discussion about how he would do that anyway. "Yeah, you know who I am? My name is..." And he would give them his whole life story nobody wanted to hear. But he also looked very angelic. Some of the things that happens when a child's in a grief response is they stop growing. They're usually very frail. My son weighed 36 pounds and wore a size 4 toddler when he came to live with me at age 6. Red hair, freckles, and hazel eyes. Nothing is more adorable. He looked like a cake top. We used to call him our Hobby Holly child, right? And he would just walk around looking so cute, right? And this one day he was so cute. We were in the store, we were grocery shopping, and we still liked him. And we were trying to buy food. We're trying to buy food that he liked, right? Trying to encourage this little skinny little frail child to eat. Everybody wanted to feed this kid. He said, I only eat white food." "What do you mean white food?" "I'll eat cottage cheese. I'll eat egg whites. If it's white, I will eat it. If it has any color to it, I won't eat it." "Why?" "Because I'll see the poison if you on the white food, Now, if I wanted to be really nasty, I could have said some poison's colorless, but he wouldn't have eaten anything then, so I didn't say that. So we're trying to find white cereal that he likes. Okay, we're in the cereal aisle, and he is giving me a hard time. I only eat sugar frosted flakes. And at every other foster home that I was in, they only fed me sugar frosted flakes. We're not eating sugar frosted flakes in my house. The third ingredient can be sugar. That's my rule. So we're reading every cereal box in the grocery store. And we finally come to compromise on a cereal that everybody finds worthwhile, which took an hour. We're in the grocery store forever. And he just looks so cute. Right? And he says to my husband, "Come here." He goes like this, "Come here." My husband bends his face down. Oh, he's making contact with me, right? So my husband, he says, "You asshole." To my husband. And there's this darling little old man who had been watching this whole interchange. Walks up to my husband and he says, "Hit him." "Well, she's not looking. Hit him." He was, yes, he used to do that. because he was a survivor, you see. And so he knew how to open up the milk carton and drink out of it and put it back, and he didn't know it was open. I mean, I used to like go around the grocery store thinking, oh, please don't. He could open up animal crackers and eat them and then fold the box back up and put it back on the thing. I'd have to really watch him like a hawk, so I could say, my son ate this, my son ate this, my son. And I used to hate people that fed their children before they paid the food. I used to go, why is that lady feeding that kid animal crackers? Right? And here I have a kid who's not only eating it, he's stealing it. So I'd have to go to the counter with empty boxes and say, my child ate this while we're in the store today. I'll pay for it. How do you handle this? Right. The first way to handle control with a 6-year-old child is don't enter into a power struggle with them, okay? I'm going to use let me give you a for instance. It's time to get up and get dressed. I'm not going to do that. What do you mean you're not going to do that? That's your first mistake. What do you mean you're not going to do that? Because then they're going to give you a litany on why they're not going to get up and they're not going to get dressed, and you can't make them. Which will end with, and if you decide to spank me, you're not allowed to do that, call my worker and find out. That's what we used to get. You get this litany of, I'm not going to do that, I don't have to do that, I don't like school, I'm not going to go to school, I feel no relevance to school in my life. If you think that you could force me, try it, but if you hit me, you'll get arrested for child abuse. Call my worker and check this out. That used to be our standard response. So I learned at a very early age, do not ask this child why they have chosen to not get dressed today. You just say, it's time, you do this broken record thing. It's time to get dressed now. And they have nobody to fight with anymore. They have a broken record. It's called the broken record.
So you don't ask him, why do you?
No. As soon as you ask them, you've entered into the dance. You don't ask them any questions. You just literally tell them what you want. And you say over and over and over again. And when they make the first move, thanks a lot, I like that. And you walk away. Now, if they want to fight with you some more, they have to get dressed and come down to the kitchen to fight with you, because that's where you are, making breakfast. Because the next fight's going to be, I'm not going to eat breakfast. I mean, when you start out like this, I'm not getting up, I'm not going to school, I'm not going to live today, I'm not participating in the world today. Sometimes you have to look to see what's going on. You might have a kid who's really, really depressed. And if you have a child who's really, really depressed, and what they really, really need is a day home with mom to hold them, because they may, the one thing about children who have suffered a loss is that their emotional growth may have stopped at an early age. So you may have put a chronologically 8-year-old to bed, and a 2.5-year-old may have just woken up. And you may have the oppositional developmental behavior of a 2-year-old. And what do you do when your 2-year-old's throwing a tantrum? You ignore them, you pick them up. You know, when you see that tired cry, you pick them up. But we don't have a tendency to do that with our 8-year-olds, because 8-year-olds are supposed to act like 8-year-olds. Well, these 8-year-olds will not always be 8. Sometimes they're 75, sometimes they're 2, sometimes they're teenagers. So you'd look, first of all, to see who you're dealing with today. Which child are you dealing with today? If you're dealing with a 2-year-old, treat them like a 2-year-old. Treat them this. That's right. Yeah. He would have stayed in bed. Fine. I got my way. I got to stay in bed. So then you can go back up and do some nurturing. Sometimes you have to keep on going back until you know what you got, because an 18-year-old's going to tell you they're not getting out of bed that day either. My husband tells me every now and then he's not getting out of bed and I have to threaten his life. So the only one who ever seems to want to get out of bed in the mornings is moms. Isn't that the truth? Because we know we have to feed everybody, so we have to get out of bed. But there's days when the whole family just is, feeling. Then the second thing I would say when you're getting control issues is look to see what's going on. Are you around an anniversary time? Is it close to their birthday? Is it close to a placement day? Is it close to their mother's birthday, if they know it? Is it close to a sib's birthday? What's going on? If you're close to one of their traumatic days, that you may need to give them a day off. I know school doesn't like that, and I know that there's certain parenting groups that would say never let your child have that much control, but that doesn't count for these children. Behavior modification doesn't work with these children. That's the kiss of death. Put a behavior chart on your refrigerator and see what happens. You have invited opposition by doing that, because they do not have the grounding to be able to fall back on. If she likes what I do, I get a reward. If I don't do the right thing, I don't get a reward. Their rewards have been shots in the darks and inconsistent anyway. So some more inconsistency doesn't bother them. They have more control than ever now. They can use that to a self-defeating purpose. They can make sure that they get punished every day of their life for being evil enough to be born. and that's what they'll do with that. So if you don't enter into it and you skirt around the power struggle, usually you can gain control. When they're angry, they may use, if they're in the anger stage, they may use that particular behavior to start a fight, so that they can become angry at you, and they can unload some of their stuff. It might be verbal, it might be physical, it might be some other wonderful behaviors, like destruction of property or whatnot. No, and think about it, because sending a child in that state to school might be the day that you get the phone call from school that they just trashed the bathroom or they beat somebody up. So if they're like that, keep them home, give them a day off, call school, tell them they're sick, tell them the dog died, tell them anything. Don't tell them anything, just tell them. That's right, school tell you an inconsistent parent. Just be prepared to hear that. Fine, that's okay, I'll be an inconsistent parent.
Do you say, like, check to see if they're ill, make them do this, they say that I got
When he needs the nurturing, that's how I do it. Oh, I don't think you feel very good. Because they won't come out and say, I want you to hold me and feed me and take care of me, just like they won't come out and tell you that they're in a grief process. I'm not getting out of bed. But you really don't look too good. And when you figure out the 2-year-old didn't come down for breakfast, okay, you go back upstairs and say, don't you feel good, honey? And I had figured out at one point that his days of opposition coincided with my days off a lot. And so and as soon as I would touch his forehead, you do your mom's touch, are you sick? Oh, I'm so ill. And he would just he does his best Sarah, you better have a day off with me. They're remarkably well by 10 a.m., and all of the Leave It to Beaver shows and everything would say, now punish this child for sneaking a day off, but you can't do that, because what you really did was went back and nurtured a piece of him that didn't get nurtured before, and that's very healing.
I had some struggles when those days came to me with our children growing, because I did not want to be a liar.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to call the school up and lie
Mm-hmm.
about my child having this need.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than having them hear me say, I have a sick child today,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
we're going to the doctors today, I just used the pat phrase, Sue doesn't feel up to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that covered
it.
all things without having to lie and without having to talk out of both sides of your mouth when your child is caught in a lie about something, where you lied.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
So that was
That's a good
struggle.
idea.
I had to really search for a way to
Yeah.
handle that.
I tried, my first approach with the school was to be honest. Jimmy's not having a good day. I really don't think that we should send him to school today, because something's probably going to happen. Big mistake. We have a sick kid on our hands. That's what the school thought. We have a mentally ill child on our hands. Let's put him in a contained classroom. And then the contained classroom teacher, right? They did it. Now my child, we had written in the school records, we were so good. Goodness, we were so good. He didn't have to change school districts when he was placed with us, because his foster parents lived in the same school districts as us. Wasn't that an advantage? Yeah. The school system then knew that we had a multiply placed, multiply traumatized child living in our home. And then the teacher then knew, because the mom that came for the first conference wasn't the same mom that came for the second conference. And she said, gee, I thought that you were about 5'2", 80 pounds, and had long red hair. Oh, that was his other mom. And then they're thinking, okay, did father remarry? Are we dealing with stepmothers? If you don't explain anything, it's kind of lots of fun to have them kind of wonder about you. And they really thought that other lady had to be his mom. Here he was a tiny little redheaded child with a tiny little redheaded lady. That had to be his mother. So we did explain. They therefore put him in a contained classroom for children with emotional disorders, and kept him there for a very long time. But we had shared with him that he had been traumatized in a closet, and that therefore they couldn't close him up anywhere, because they do use timeout rooms in these classrooms. So one day I went to school to visit. I had been advised to periodically check the classroom unannounced. So I went on one of my announced visits, and I heard this screaming, and a garbage can came flying down the stairs of the school before I got to the floor that he was on. And you know how you know it's your kid? My kid. It's my kid. I know it's my kid, I get up the stairs, and here are two grown human beings holding a door shut, and the door's going ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. I said, oh my God, what's going on? And she said, Jim's in the timeout room. He does this. Now, that's how much adrenaline he had. That little tiny child could force the door open while two grown women tried to hold it shut, and they couldn't figure out why he went berserko when they put him in there. And she said, but you know, he's real good when we let him out. By that time, he was in shock. So, and he opened up the door. I talked to him through the door, and then he opened up the door, and I went into the closet with him. He had this was their supply closet. He had trashed the contents of the supply closet. I mean, there was no paper left for the rest of the year. The paints were all over the place, everything. Before he went for the door, he ripped the shelves down trying to get out. And I said, have you considered that this isn't a good place to put this child? And she said, well, it's standard procedure to use the timeout room when one of these children are out of control. I said, hey, have you found him to be in control since you put him in this room? Well, he is when we let him out. Yes, now he's in shock. You've got a kid who's standing like a zombie like this. I just picked him up and went home. I said, I'm calling the police. I don't know what to do. I called our agency and told them, that they needed to, because we didn't have any legal rights at that point, that they needed to put a restraining order on these people to keep them out of the timeout room. And the agency called me back and said, we know you're kind of inexperienced, but this is standard procedure. Jim's going to have to learn how to live with this. So I just kept on going to school all the time. So sometimes when I had a 2-year-old who wouldn't get out of bed, he had been in the closet the day before, and he just wasn't emotionally. The day they stopped putting him in this timeout room was the day I took him out of school forever. We had gotten a psychiatrist's report telling them that it was detrimental to this child's emotional health, that he was not an emotionally ill child, rather he was a multiply traumatized child, that they couldn't use behavior modification, they had to use positive reinforcement, and that absolutely positively they could not use a closed room or anything that he perceived to be a closet to use a timeout procedure for him, because you can time out just by putting your head down. You don't need to be closed in a room to time out. He does time out very well. Even today, I could say, take a time out, he'll sit down, put his hands in his lap, and gain some composure.
So it wasn't because you were truthful with them about his adoption that they were ignorant of the fact that this was not good for him?
It was because they don't believe that the adoption was a significant factor. They told me that was not a significant factor in his life. It's not a significant factor in anybody's life. He told me that anything that happens to you 2 years beforehand doesn't matter anymore. And my response to the teacher was, when did you get your degree? 6 years ago. So then you're not a teacher. It's the only thing I could think of to say. It's the only thing I could think of to say at the moment. No, I wanted to
You said he was a special needs child. I immediately
Right.
assumed that he was handicapped. That evidently is not.
Special needs, right, the category of special needs children goes to older than birth, part of a SIV group. Okay. Minority children, children who are medically handicapped and emotionally handicapped. All of those children fall into the special needs category. As a matter of fact, it is my opinion today that there are no children coming into care that are not special needs, because we're not getting newborns coming into care that aren't also special needs, medically fragile children. So.
A lot wider than what we ever.
Mm-hmm.
So he is a normal child, except he's been traumatized
Right.
in his first 5-6 years.
Right.
Okay, so no learning
Right.
disabilities.
Right. He doesn't have learning disabilities. He has emotional delays. I would call that delays. And so my advice to parents when they're taking a child, what I've learned from my first child to my second child from the school system is to know that their development is going to stop while they're grieving. They're going to stop emotionally maturing while they're grieving. And that's going to happen for a while. They may lose a whole year. They probably lose that placement year. They don't learn anything in school that year. If you can keep them out of school that year, do it. If you could keep them home, do it. If you could keep a child from going to first grade and keep them in kindergarten another year, do it. And right now we're battling because we have a child that's chronologically first grade age, and I want her in a developmental first grade. I don't want her in a regular first grade, which means that she will then have to go to first grade. And we had all the testing on everything. Everybody concurred. We didn't let her go to kindergarten. We kept her in preschool another year. Aren't we awful? And she's doing very, very, very well. And then a school social worker called me the other day and wanted to know what was wrong with me that I was purposely putting my child behind when she was certainly physically the right size to go to first grade. I said, she is physically the right size to go to first grade. You're absolutely correct. She's very tall for her age. She has a, she comes from two very, very tall parents. She's probably going to be taller than me when she's in fourth grade. But I don't see that a reason for somebody in first grade. She needed to be in school, not full-time, so that she needed more time with me, so we kept her in preschool longer. Now, they could have argued with me that she needed kindergarten. And we were waiting, to hear, maybe you should put her in kindergarten instead. But she's cognitively tested out too high for kindergarten. So now they want to just put her in regular first grade. So now we have to go back and do another battle. We'll win.
See, in Washington, parents will keep their kids out of school next year because they want to.
See, in Illinois, you could do that too. Except they won't argue with you if they're your birth children. But they'll argue with you if it's your adopted child. They want to know why you're holding back this child. There's a difficulty in entitlement between public service systems and adoptive parents. For instance, when I was suggesting to them that I was going to have them arrested if they put my child in a closet one more time with my other child, they told me they were going to call Gary Morgan and have my children removed from my home. Now, we were talking finalized adoption. We're not talking foster care placement. They said, we'll fix you. So I called Gary from their office, and they turned purple. I called their bluff, and they backed down. Good thing I knew Gary was out of town that day. But Gary Morgan is the child guardian in the state of Illinois. So I called. He was the person. They were going to have him come and take my children right out of my house, And so, but that's what here in not every school district does this, but some school districts will do this. And they'll tell you that the adoption is not a significant factor in their life, but they'll also hold it over your head that you're not fully entitled to this child. That there's always a partnership between you and the state. Okay. So you get into lots of extra issues.
When my son, he was also adopted at 6, we had a problem with him it started in first grade. Kindergarten was wonderful. First grade, we switched schools. We went to a parochial school then. It was not good. We should have left him in the public school.
Yeah.
And he stayed there for second grade and then third grade. In the middle of third grade, now my son didn't talk English at this. He didn't even talk in Spanish, And they just couldn't understand why he couldn't get real good in school. And why aren't you working with him at night? And we are, but we're trying to help him learn English as well as everything else. And we had a frustrated nun in third grade that did not want to take the time with him.
Right.
And made his life hell in the third grade. And we went over there and said, you're coming home. And we immediately brought him over to public school, enrolled him, and he started the next day. And he suffered a loss with that.
Right.
Even though he was having a difficult time, it was another loss because not only did he lose his birth family, but he also lost his country, which is very traumatic. And nobody took any of this into consideration. We kept him in the public school for the rest of third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, ran into another problem in the fifth grade, had to pull him out again to get him into a better school, which he stayed there. He suffered a loss with that one again because he was being moved again. He went to the other school, stayed there for met a wonderful teacher for his fifth grade teacher. Sixth grade teacher. We repeated fifth grade. That's what we did. He repeated fifth grade. We held him back. Why would we hold him back?
Right.
Because he missed all of fifth grade because he had this dingbat for a teacher. And he skipped sixth and went into seventh. No, skipped sixth and went to seventh grade. So he was at this school, and then we had another problem with this school, and we're going school hopping from one end to the other.
Yes. Many adoptive parents have
We're
to do
back
that.
in the public school, our school district, and he didn't. But he had so many problems because everybody, he's been here and he's been through this and he's been through that. Well, there's no reason you should be still grieving over any of that. Why is he having problems now? He's all this tutoring and I'm sorry, I did not have a good experience with school. And now our little girl, who's also we repeated first grade for her. She's hyperactive with the ADD, with hyperactivity, which is lots of fun. And we did not have a good kindergarten teacher. We had a very awful first grade teacher. She's back in first grade. It is not a lot of fun trying to put your adopted child in a school.
Right.
Because they do not look at the whole sphere of the life of this child.
Right.
It's very difficult as a parent to have to go and fight almost every day for your kid.
That's where
My
adoptive
kid's
parents
got
get
rights,
tired.
And nobody will give it to them.
Right.
So not just these adoptees that are searching for their birth parents. You got problems with adoptive parents. when
That's
the
right.
kids are little.
That's
But
right.
they also have very good processes as they go through lifeline studies and genetic studies in school.
Mhm.
And if you're not, I mean, our children were raised to be very open with their feelings and very honest. And when they were going through those courses, they told their teachers they couldn't take part in this. And we felt we almost, to keep everything on an honest level, you almost have to tell the school system that your children are adopted. You hope that the teachers would be sensitive to them. And each one of them in third grade went into the Lifeline study part, went to their teachers and said, this is something we can't do. We don't have the information. Most of the teachers were very sensitive, but when our daughter had to face that problem, the teacher just stood up and announced to the classroom that Sue Gustafson could not take part in this study because she was adopted, she's an orphan, and she doesn't have information that the rest of us have.
Well, that's
And-
nice and sensitive and caring.
Yeah.
And this
And
took
loving.
them home with these feelings of total distress and betrayal. That a teacher couldn't take this sensitive part of her life. She didn't look at it in those adult terms.
Terms,
We
right.
were feeling this. And it's just a very tough place for adoptive parents to be when things like this happen. And genetic studies, when they tell your children to turn around and use the adoptive family's history.
Yeah.
And our children were raised,
Yeah.
you be honest with who you are. And they would stand up and say, we can't do this study. We don't have the
What you
information.
do is you turn it around and you tell the adopted child, look how fortunate you are. What you do is you are able to do 2 family trees. You do your adopted family on the bottom and you do your birth family on the top. You're not going to have as much at the top, true. But this way you can participate. And look how fortunate you are that you have 2 trees to do it.
My son went through that this year, and we had given him the option of not doing it. And I would write a note to the teacher saying that he was not going to participate in this exercise. And if she needed to know why, she could call me. Because we had taken him from the school, the public school system that we were having difficulty with, and put him in a parochial school. I thought, well, the person who is not going to understand is going to be the parochial school system. And the nun said to him, you do what you feel you need to do about this. And she left it entirely in his hands. And he said nothing to my husband and I. I knew that the assignment was going on because he was pulling through, he was asking a lot of questions, and he was pulling through his life book a lot. And he was asking me things. And I said, is there a reason for this? Yes, but I will tell you later. And so I would just answer the questions. You just sometimes you just have to trust him. He finished the presentation to the class, and then that day he came home. And he said, Sister Betty did the best thing I've ever seen her do today. And he said, so I've decided to stop hating her, because God knows what he was doing in her classroom. I said, oh, well, that's really nice. I'm really happy to hear that. And he said, I gave my presentation, and at the end, you're supposed to write down at that one what you think you inherited from each side of the family. And he wrote down that he had inherited his good looks from his birth mother, his terrible temper from his birth father, his gift of gab from me, and his long legs from my husband. Okay, so he got everybody in. And the nun said nothing about some of it's genetically possible and some of it isn't. She just said to him, aren't you lucky that you had 2 sets of parents to offer things to you, and dropped it. The good thing that she did is she went next, and the kids couldn't ask him any questions then. She saved him from that, but she let him go ahead and present both everything that he had. And we have a lot of information,
To a conclusion for themselves is what they could do towards the project, but it certainly wasn't going to be like anybody else. Because we had no information.
Right.
We just did a whole study on Columbia with all the postcards and everything.
And see, and that's great, because you can present, this is my origins, this is where I come from, and because I had when we had known that the assignment was going to come someday, so Dan and I had lots of these discussions. So we're really well-prepared parents, right? We're going to have all these discussions on how we're going to handle it.
Right.
Not once has everything that we had planned ever gone the way that we thought that it should have gone the way we planned it, you know. So we had done the same thing. I have a lot of information on Ireland, and I was going to do the broad scope of being Irish and help. I was going to prepare to help him that way, and he didn't even want. See, he didn't want any help. That's one thing that I had to learn. Is there are times when, as a parent, what I need to do is nothing. I need to let my child work it through himself. I need to let my child grieve it himself. I need to let my child have what he needs to have and stop trying to fix it, because I'm a fixer. I want everybody to be happy. I want everything to be okay. You know, if you're feeling bad, I'm going to bake you a cookie, make you feel better. Whether you want a cookie to feel better or not, you better feel better when I give you this cookie, because I'll make you another one if you don't.
I think this is very interesting, because I don't know if it's the part of the country or whatnot, but we were always very vocal with the fact that our daughter was adopted, and we told the school.
Mhm.
But our problem was almost different, because she was the pet of every teacher. I mean, she had everybody wrapped around her finger. She had everybody at church wrapped around her finger. Today, at the age of 22, she still has everybody wrapped around her finger. And I mean, our friends and different people will come up and they'll always say, well, how's Laura doing? And I told my husband the other day, I said, no, nobody ever asks about Kendall or Kevin.
Right.
It's only about Lori. That's the only person there even, and I mean, she knows it, and still she has such a hard time with identity. And I mean, we had her spoken for before she was even born. Because we're going to take this child, whether it was a boy, girl, twins, or triplets. And so, I mean, I have no idea where this is coming from, but she still had the identity problem.
Right. It's a normal stage of development for an adopted child
But
to
now
have the
when she did
identity problem.
The thing, I never even thought about it. She just used our background because we didn't have hers to give her.
Right.
But when she was a senior in high school, she gave a speech, and she said, Mom, I gave a speech about different things, and at the very end, I guess it was on abortion. And she told him, she said, I'm so glad that abortion wasn't legal 18 years ago, because I wouldn't be here. And she had the whole class bawling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our children had to re-deal with this issue too,
Sure.
which brought up a lot of anger because we had misinformation on two of them.
Mhm.
And they grew up, I mean, we gave them the information that the agencies gave to us, but what they gave to us was not their real nationalities on one side. And so in coming together with trying to have their identity, they found out that they had been deceived when they had reunions with their
And that'll
original
really evoke
family.
anger. When a child is going through identity, girls at 11 can be dreadful. Dreadful. Not that boys don't get dreadful. My son's in that stage right now. He's 12 and a half, and he's going to pretend that he wasn't born, okay? He just developed on the earth at age 12, and he owes ties to nobody. He's very angry at his birth mother, and he's very angry at me right now. And so he sat his birth mother down on his 12th birthday. He called a meeting, and I mean, he called the caseworker, told her what time everybody was going to be there, what room in the agency we were going to use, who was to attend, told me what the luncheon menu was to be, and said, I have something very important to say to people, and I just want your total support. I said, well, can you give me a clue on what I'm supporting? Because I mean, if you're going to murder everybody, I don't think I can support you. He said, no, I just need you to just nod your head, Mom. Just stand next to me and nod your head. Oh, God, okay. So he had me go out and buy, he has a sister who is now 15. And the last time he saw his sister, she would have been 8. In all of the times that they were arranging visits with birth parents, they kind of forgot that this child had grandparents and sisters that he loved. And he had been asking to see his sister for 6 years, and he finally has learned how to manipulate the system. He said to his mother, he said to the caseworker to tell his mother that she wouldn't see him until she brought his sisters with. And everybody had to be there, or he wasn't coming into the room. And then I was to call the agency and make sure that they were all in the room, and then we were going to leave the house and drive down, because he was not going to drive down until he knew that he was going to get his way. So he had me buy the necklace that says, "The Lord watch between thee and me while we're apart," that breaks in half. He had me buy that, and she got half, and he got half. So he saw his older sister. The only thing he asked me to do when we walked in the room was to have his mother stay busy with cutting sandwiches. He had me get sandwiches that needed to be cut, with cutting sandwiches and getting portions together while he had some time alone with his older sister. Because it was the only way that he could do it, because the mom and the sister compete a lot for attention. He had his time alone with his sister. He told his sister to call the agency anytime she wanted to see him, and he would come to see her, and she didn't have to bring Mama with. He gave his little sister, he has a younger sister that his mother had after she surrendered him, gave her a kiss and a hug, sat his mother down and said, okay, now we've had lunch, and now we've had cake, and now I have something to say. I don't want to see you for a while. I don't do real good after these visits. I'm having difficulty feeling who I need to be loyal to. So what I'm going to do is go home and just be quiet for a few years, and I'll see you again in 4 years. Goodbye. And he gets up and he walks out the door, and he leaves me in the room going, doing this, going, yeah. And all I could do, and this poor lady, and I didn't know what to say to make things better for her, and I was honestly speechless. And so thank God for caseworkers. Sometimes she came into the room, put her arm around her, and walked her out of the room. They all left me totally alone. I cleaned up the sandwiches. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Took my son, got in the car, and we went home.
You know what he needs?
And he said to me, so what do you think? Halfway home, so what do you think? Well, I'm still processing this, Jim, but I'm very, very proud of you. Do you feel real comfortable with what you said? And he said, yes. He was 12. He said, now what I need for you to do is to help me live up to this. That's all he's asked of me. He told me to filter any information and not tell him anything that would hurt him. So he then went into the identity crisis stage, like the next day. I don't belong to anybody. I was never born. And we had to he had me take his life book, put it away where he can't get at it, because he would destroy it at this stage of the game. And he's starting all over from scratch. He's just going to be himself, and he doesn't know anything to nobody, you know. And we're going into this search of, I came from here, and I think that exercise triggered it. But he's working. That's the positive thing, that sometimes when your life is icky at home as an adoptive parent, our life is icky right now. He may get an A on a test. He won't show it to me. He may have all his homework done. He may throw half of it out on his way to school, because he will make sure that he will fail until he's done punishing himself. And all I could do is stand next to him and nod. That's all I can do right now, and know what's going on. When they're in this stage and they are rejecting of the adoptive parents, this is when we see a lot of the disruptions happen. This is when we see a lot of the kids leave the home, because they will literally say to you, how do you ever get stuck with turkeys like you? I'm getting out. Call my worker. My kid's always big, call my worker, because he's a worker. Call my worker, tell her to get me out of here. You know, I'm packing. Get me a U-Haul to get all my stuff, because I'm taking everything with me, you know. And we thought that it would be better if he stayed there and we left. He's got more stuff than I do. But the one thing I've learned in the last 7 years is not to try to stop this, but to let him have it, because he needs to work through this. Somewhere there's a person there, a person that has to come out of being of the people he was born to, his life experiences, and us. And it's not going to be an easy task to put that together. I know that it's going to be a long road, and he's going to need our support, and we're all going to need help to get through it. And we're lucky enough to have our help built in. And I think that's one other thing I want to tell. I tell people when they're preparing for adoption, your services need to be in place at the time that you're preparing for adoption. There's pre-adoption services, there's adoption services, there's post-adoption services. I'd like to see that all end and just call everything adoption services. Your support groups need to begin during your preparation time. Every adoptive parent needs a support group, because nobody will understand this, what you need to celebrate the time. Like when we knew he was accepting us as his family. But when he came in, everything was neat in his room. People would say to me, how'd you get the 6-year-old to keep his room so clean? Isn't this wonderful? Everything was in order. Everything was in a row. Nothing was ever out of place. The reason was he had left 5 places quickly. He didn't get to take his things with him. He knew that he was going to have everything this time, because he wasn't going to lose any more stuff. So he kept everything where he knew he could get it quick when the social worker pulled up in front of the house. He said to me, 1 worker in the car is a visit, 2 workers, you're moving. That's what he used to tell me. So he would check from his bedroom window to see how many people were in the car.
One worker does what?
1 worker is a home visit, 2 workers, you're moving. They always bring somebody else with them when they move you. Somebody's got to hold the kid in the car. You know, in Jimmy's case, somebody's got to hold the kid in the car.
Do you have other children? Do you have a girl too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a daughter as well.
Same situation?
She came from an adoption disruption, and she was younger. She was 4 when she was placed with us, and she did not know she was adopted. She was placed in the home at a year, but had had 3 emergency placements before that. So she assumed that she was born to the people that she was living with for 4 years. And unfortunately, they decided not to adopt her, not to finalize their adoption with her, and they asked the
What
state
is
to
your
leave.
son's behavior? How has
Since
it
it-
influenced his sister?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, the second child is always a trauma. It brought back everything. One of the issues that we did not know that he had, that certainly makes sense to us today, but hindsight's better, I guess. My son has 2 birth sisters. They didn't get placed outside of the extended family, only he did. Every time he left a foster home, they adopted one of the other children. They were females. We didn't really know that. We've only recently. He has always lost out to a girl. Do you want to know how he treats his sister? Whoa, we have to keep them in separate rooms. We have to watch constantly. Right now, he's very angry. We never do social activities as a foursome. My husband takes my son one place. We just went on vacation, right? My daughter went to one play group, my son went to another play group. We went to Disney World, my son and my husband went one place, my daughter and I went to another place. And then we met, switched kids. It was wonderful. It worked out very well. But right now, it's not safe for him to have a sister. When he saw the girl come into the household, he packed. He knew we were going to, he said, I'm only a piece of paper away from leaving here. And then he told me about the day that that his mom placed him as an adoptive placement and how the workers went in. She carried a piece of paper and she signed it, carried it out, handed it to the worker, and they took him. You know? And so his realization of a female, right, was that he was very streetwise. Oh, he was very streetwise. I took him downtown with me. I never get lost. When I didn't know the loop, but he did. He'd say, oh, we're by Cubs Park. Now go this way, and this way. He took me lots of places that I've never been before. And he knows how to pick locks so well. We're on the plane, and he got the phone out, you know, that you need a credit card for? He got it out with the playing card. I mean, he's wonderfully talented. Whatever he does in life, he's going to be a success. I just hope that he chooses to live on this side of the law. Yeah. Because if he's a criminal, he's going to be a good one. I know it. You know, that's something I was talking about. He has a wonderful presence, and I think that he'll probably be a performer. He likes to sing and dance and things like that and whatnot. If he becomes a school teacher or something in the academic world, then this is a mother that will die of shock, you know, because he told me math has no relevance to his life, nor does spelling. He sees no reason why anybody should ever have to spell. We could do everything by picture and computer as far as he's concerned. And as long as there's spell check, why do you need to spell? You know, that's my son's logic. He's remarkable. My daughter, we had a hard task with my daughter because she didn't know why she was being asked to leave her birth home. We didn't know, she didn't know that she was a foster child. So here we're using all the terminology. I was a person that had to tell her that she first grew in one person's body and then came to live with another person and was now coming to live with me. She was pre-verbal when everything happened to her. So her response was to regress to about age 10 months. And so for the first 6 or 8 months that we had her, I carried her. We had to carry her. We had to treat her as though she was pre-1-year-old. I mean, she ate the foods that a baby, she wanted to eat baby food. She sucked her thumb. She wanted a bottle. She did everything. She did the total regression. So we let her regress. I stayed home for a couple weeks. We let her regress. She came back up to about age 2. And at that point, we let her go to preschool. And we've kept her in preschool. She just tested out to have an emotional level of almost 6, and she's 6.5. So she's come a long way in 12 months. 6.
6.
Yeah.
She's tested out at 6.
She has a vocabulary of a 9-year-old, but the rest of her tested out 6.
Can you tell me, what support did you have to know how to handle these things? Whatnot? It sounds like you had to have at least 5 doctorates and 2 bachelors and whatnot in order to have child therapy, child behavior, all those things. I mean, how do you know the things that you're saying to us?
We flew by the seat of our pants.
You did?
Yep. I went to
You
school.
make so many mistakes that they don't tell you how to handle this every
Right.
time.
We were lucky enough to be connected with a therapist called Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, who validated us. He said, what do you think you're looking at? And I said, I think this is what I'm looking at. I went to school and took courses in child development and child psychology and got a degree. I remember walking into calling colleges and saying, I need to get my degree in post-adoptive services. Where do I go? They said, what's that?
What's that?
So, and then when I was looking for internships, I eventually looked at social work versus human services work and decided that human services work is where the answer to what we needed lied, because we needed advocacy and we needed self-help groups. Those were 2 of the things that I knew that I needed.
But you went to school after you got him.
A year after I got him. For the first year,
First aid, how did you know to tell him he could stay home with his cuddle and all those things? Did you
just on guts. I did it on guts. I just did it on guts, and I called my worker and I said, if you want to yell at me, go ahead and yell at me, but this is what I'm going to do. And she said, you're doing exactly the right thing. So my caseworker validated.
This marks the end of session 39, tape 1. Go now to session 39, tape 2.
My child has night terrors. My child has all of these things that people thought he was diagnosed juvenile schizophrenic because he had night terrors, and he could vividly tell you about his trauma, and because there are things sensually that will trigger him back into the trauma, and we had to go into therapy to deal with it. Now, we had a very good therapist who dealt with us on attachment and on dealing with the traumas, and we've been in and out of therapy. You go in, you work, you come out and you heal. You go in, you work, you come out and you heal. We've had good support. Parent support groups have been a lifesaver. And that there weren't any, we had to start some.
And you started with that. The question I had is, I'm a social worker in an agency with no post-adoption services, and one of my jobs is to train prospective adoptive parents and foster parents who are adopting special needs children. And we say a lot of what you have just said, but the problem I'm finding is that at the point we're saying it, the parents are not at a point they want to hear it.
That's right.
And when they're at that point, there are no services unless they have a subsidy. If
Right.
they have a subsidy, they have a worker they can call,
Right.
and at least they have a worker, but the services are not there. And I'm sitting here trying to think, we give them all kinds of lists of books, we encourage a support group to be formed, but it has not been, this is Virginia, outside of
Are
Washington
there no
DC.
always groups there, parent support groups? They're nationwide.
Not that I'm familiar with.
One of the things that we found worked is there's a lot of people, after they finalize, you guys are great that you tell people that they're going to need a support group. Not every agency tells people this. So the first time they see a therapist or a psych unit is when they're in deep crisis.
Oh, yeah.
They don't ward it off ahead of time because they don't think that they can.
Well, and also,
You
they're
know.
afraid of disillusioning us.
That's right.
They are supposed
Yes.
to have been
Yeah.
good enough, quote unquote,
Right.
to receive
Well,
this
if you've
child.
already passed a test on parenting,
Yeah.
then you shouldn't have to ask for help.
Exactly.
And that's a sense of false pride that adoptive parents get, that I have too,
And you make a mistake.
that I've had too. That's right, and they won't give me any more. If I complain about this one, they're not going to give me another one, are they? So I had all of that too, and then I would call up and I would say, but my child has needs, and I don't know what to do. As I went to school, then I learned a little bit more about what his needs were. Advocacy was a thing that I was born and raised a nice Irish Catholic girl. I waited to be told what it was that I needed before I asked for it. And especially, I would not cross a teacher. I would not cross an authority figure. Of course, I changed all that now. But at the time that he was placed with me, I didn't think that I had the right to tell the teacher how I thought his educational plan should be instituted. when I saw him, but you change when you see your kid in shock in a closet, when you know what's happened to them in that closet, and you pick up your kid and you say, you cannot do this to my child anymore. And I think it takes your anger comes in, your concern for your child steps in, and you move on your instincts from that, and then you'll know what's right. But we all need to have the support group. But one day when Jim's room was so neat, I'm going to go back to that for just a second. I went into his room and I was talking to this, and I hadn't even realized that this little thing had happened. But I'm talking to this child, and he comes up from behind me and answers me and starts to laugh. Well, his room was so messy, I thought he was in bed, and it was some stuff that he had covered up with his blankets, and it hadn't dawned on me how messy his room was, and he just started to laugh. Well, I ran downstairs and called my girlfriend, who he has 5 kids who have done this, and I said, his room's messy, and she said, "Ooh!" Right? Now, who else could you call but another adopted parent to celebrate the fact that your child's room is a mess, or to celebrate the fact that your child said, I hate your guts, get me out of here? You know, that they felt safe enough to throw their crapola at you. Only another adoptive parent knows that that is not a time to get mad at that kid. It's a time of grand celebration, and let's celebrate that the kid got mad at you. They trusted you enough to show you their anger. Of course, once that trust comes, then you have to wear a bullseye. Just get a bullseye shirt. Tell the kid, throw the eggs here, because they're going to throw it till it's done. Yeah. So,
I think we can all listen too, but when it actually happens, you know, it's the old adage, it's pretty hard to drain that swamp when you're up to your neck in alligators.
yes, exactly. I think looking at where you've been when you've lost helps you deal with your kids. In any time, we've all been competed and lost in our lifetime. We all wanted to date a boy that wouldn't look at us, or we all wanted to be the lead in the ballet and didn't get it. Or sometime in our life we have suffered a loss. We've all had somebody die that we dearly loved, usually by the time we're an adult. We've all lived through that. Look at yourself at your time of loss and see if it compares to what your child's doing now, and you'll be able to know. You'll be able to touch into what's going on with them. And how much information do you have? At a time when a child's angry and not going to get out of bed, they may need to know the story of their birth that day. You know, that might be what you need to do. Or one thing that my son has that I've been one of the best tools, I think it's the most precious thing his mom ever gave him, is a picture of her while she was pregnant with him. So he knows that he was born. He knows that he was really born out of that body. Here's a picture of my mom when she was carrying me inside of her. I really came from there. And when he's denying, you know, I let him deny. And then they'll process as it comes down to when we're crying, nobody loves me, you know. And then I could say, but you were born. Don't tell me you weren't born, and don't tell me you would be better off dead. Let's just look at this, you know. And he can come to a resolution that she loved me enough to give me life. She didn't have an abortion. You know, he's used that adage too. She could have had an abortion. She loved me enough to give me life. She wanted me when I was born. She just couldn't carry me. And there's a whole nother set of stuff coming on that, and I know that. But not every child has a picture like that, or even has a picture of their birth mother. You know, because I can at least go through the book, and his mom and his grandmother put together a book of that picture of his mom and his dad together, and she's pregnant, all the way through pictures of aunts and uncles and grandparents, and he knows that he had Easter, and he knows that he had Christmas, because there's all those holiday pictures are in there when he was little, when he was with them, up until the time that he was about 3, and then I have pictures from the foster homes in his life book from 3 on. So we have a whole pictorial view of his entire life. We're really, really lucky.
I was going to ask you, Karen, one day when my son was then, I think, 8, Beth was about 4, and he was watching her in the backyard, her swing set and stuff. We didn't have a swing set for Mickey, because he was older. We had the trucks and the cars and all that stuff. And he was sitting, and tears were coming down his face, and I said, Matthew, what's the matter? And he said, I wished I'd have been little and had toys to play with, you know. And I just had to walk out.
Yeah, I wished I could have been born here, is what our son has said. I wished I could have just been born here. And I think a lot of adoptees feel that way too. But the unborn business, I mean, Jimmy is lucky that he does have those photographs. And you're smart enough that you have copies of the photographs, because I know that they destroy.
up.
They get ripped up and
We
they...
ripped Mom's head off. We've had to tape her back on a couple of times.
I think what I'm the angriest about is that my son never had a child.
Yeah. And I think that we've been told that you cannot give that back, but there are pieces that you can give. You can respond to the feeling. I don't see anything wrong with putting my 12-year-old in the bath full of bubbles, giving him all the bath toys that his sister just played with, and letting him regress to a nice little 6-year-old playing in the tub. But I mean, but
he
still.
he will sit for his hours playing with Legos and cars.
That's right.
And I don't make anything out of it because he's never had a child.
When I was carrying Kathy, when she was just 5. Now Kathy, my daughter's parents, her mom is 5'9", and her dad is 6'6". So I have a 6-year-old who's this tall. And last year I was carrying her around to the store. And she sucks his thumb. She's got a thumb in her mouth and her twisting her hair. She's got her head on my shoulder and I'm carrying her around the store. And somebody said to her, such a big girl like you shouldn't need to suck your thumb and be carried. And she said, yes, I do. Because this child has good self-esteem. Yes, I do. And she's not going to let anybody take anything because one of the causes of disruption is that they couldn't handle the regression of the child and they wouldn't allow it. So they did. You know what you do when you to get a child to stop sucking their thumb or stuff. She just sucked right through it. She sucked the thumb off of her glove the first week she came to live with me. Because she looked at me and I looked at her and I said, put your thumb in your mouth anytime you want to in this house. We don't care if you suck your thumb. We still like it. That thumb was in my mouth. But she needed it. She needed to go back and she needed to capture. And now we've proved ourselves right in that she caught up. She caught up all those years developmentally. She didn't want that. She wanted her thumb. She wanted her thumb.
They were trying to get David to take a pacifier. He didn't want his thumb or the pacifier.
He didn't want anything. Jimmy either. Jimmy was one of these children. I think that he was born drinking out of a glass. I don't know.
Yeah.
He just seemed to not have that particular need. His mom told me she potty trained him at 6 months. One time, and I thought, would you wonder if you're going to have a child with bathroom problems because they're traumatized. The only thing that he did have is that he can hold it for such a long time, and he has gotten bladder infections. And I had him at the urologist, and I said, yes, I have a problem with this child, and I don't want to cause a major issue, but I have difficulty telling him that when he gets up in the morning, you have to go to the bathroom. And as a person who he has to wake up early to go to the bathroom because I can't make it all night long, I hate this child who doesn't ever go. So, he said, why? He said to Jimmy, why? Why don't you get up and go potty? Everybody gets up and goes potty, And he said, my sister wet the bed, and my mom placed her for adoption. I'm never going to wet the bed or have an accident. Which, so then I said, did Jimmy's older sister? She said, oh, I wouldn't let her back in the house. She wet the bed every time she slept with me.
My God.
I was like, his perception was that that's why she was placed. And he was going to make dead sure that didn't happen to him, so he started practicing at the earliest age that he could not to urinate.
Well, I think there are those insecurities too. We've had adoptees. I've heard of one family that had 4 children, and they're all adopted, and 2 are biracial, 2 are from Korea, and for some, they had discussed the fact that when they got the 4th one, that their family was now complete, and so on. And somehow their file was still on file with some agency somewhere, and they got a call. And we have a birth mother who is going to be delivering a biracial child, and she chose your family. And oh, gee, I don't know. Her husband's a fireman. They don't have a lot of money. They were thinking about 5 kids and so on. And they finally decided, well, we'll go and talk to her anyway. And they did. And this girl really wanted them, to raise her child, and wanted to choose them to be the adoptive parents. And they came home, they were talking about it and everything, and Mary noticed that her one daughter, who's about 6, became extremely efficient around the house. She was going to, let me do that for you, Mom. Let me take care of this. Now let me set the table. Let me wash the windows. And of course, at 6 years old, please don't help me. I have to do it all over again. And just finally said, what is this all about? So, well, you said there was only room here for 4. She wasn't going to be the one to go. See, their childish perceptions, it's hard to understand. We see a lot of adoptees who are great pleasers too. Oh, they are the wonderful shining child who everybody loves, and they get the straight A's, and they put a lot of pressure on themselves. And in some households, if there are just two, we have the good adoptee, the bad adoptee. Bad being, to many adoptive parents, the bad adoptee is going to, talk about the birth family, is going to give you a lot of stress about it, and the good one never talks about it at all. And we can just pretend that, I'm not adopted.
You know what I have seen there's the age differences in our adoption group in Green Bay. We have the older adoptees coming in who are, we don't want to talk to this type of people. And a lot of the young ones that are coming in now that I have seen at our last meeting, they're very much more open. They are meeting the birth parents. They are talking with them. They are much more open about it. It's so much healthier. And if I can only convince these older ones, and I'm older than they are,
So what are they coming to the group for? They're not searching.
Well, they're working out different problems with their children, this type of stuff.
Oh.
We have an ongoing support group every month.
Yeah.
And we have, different speakers every month. I recommend anybody that's adopting, thinking of adoption.
After we had these photographs from David's birth mother too, I knew that there was going to be more to that. I wasn't at all sure what it was going to be. He was 12, and he was managing to lose his homework because he's made a career of doing stuff like that. And oh sure, I'll take care of it, and never means to do it at all. It's a problem. And it's very hard. Passive aggressive is really hard to deal with because he won't work on anything because there's nothing to work on and there's no problem here. You're all wrong. I'm fine. But what did happen after we got these photographs and he sent the card and so forth, and we were kind of sitting back with this, a little bit. And he was sitting at the kitchen table one winter night in February, which had been 2 months, and sitting there not doing his homework, but had to sit there for a period of an hour. Whether he did it or didn't do it, would have to sit there. And, the dropping of the pencil, that pencil must have hit the ground at least a dozen times every 5 minutes. And I'm not doing anything, and Leo and I are sitting out in the family room. And pretty soon he's had it. He's not getting our goat adequately. So all the books got up and thrown on the floor, and I hate you, you fake parents, and out in the garage. And it's cold out there. I thought, good, now I have a kid who's failing the course and who's also going to have pneumonia and all the rest of this stuff. So pretty soon I did go out there, and he's in one of the cars, and he's gotten a blanket out of the trunk, and he's put it around him, sitting there in the back seat of one of the cars. I said, I think you maybe want to come in pretty soon. It's awful cold out there. He came in, and he came in, and he said, I really love you. And he gave me a hug. Now, we've had this kid for 12 years, I've had a lot of hugs from my little boy. This is the first real hug I ever got from that child. But I would not ever have known that. So we started our adoption then. That's when we started really being mother and son. And I feel sorry that his birth mother isn't more forthcoming. We have a religious problem there, I think. I don't want to offend anybody, but both the birth mother and the birth father's family are fundamentalists. And he is the evidence of their sin. So he's going to have a real rough row there. As his paternal grandmother has sent us, we contacted her also, hoping maybe we could, find somebody here who's going to want to meet or do something. And she did write a lovely letter, and I sent her pictures. She said, please send pictures because my son did deny paternity, and we did know that. Well, ho, 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 this kid is the spitting image of Dad and Granddad and Dad's subsequent son born in his marriage. And I think this man doesn't need women to make babies at all because they're all just like him. They all look just like him. But as she said, this has gone on now for several years, and we get a Christmas letter. We get their printed Christmas letter. It says to family and friends, you know, and we get a copy. And often it gets, it has little pictures or something too. So that's nice. But in David finally, you know, his birth mother did say that when he was 18, she felt that she would be able then to talk to him about it. It's her guilt, I think, is what it is. She didn't feel that she can explain to him. Her parents wanted her to keep the child, and she said that she chose not to do that because he would have been kept for the purpose of being the bastard, and her sin would never go away. Yeah, and he would not have a good life. So in talking to the paternal grandmother who went to the hospital and did see the baby, in attempting this past year to try to make some kind of a time maybe David could meet her or whatever, and I heard from her that no, she has shown all the pictures and the family members and so forth, and Dad still is denying paternity. And her husband does not approve of this.
The grandfather?
Yeah, he does not approve of this contact.
And we know where the fathers get.
Oh yeah, we know where Dad gets his thing. And it makes me so
That's
sad.
very difficult because that happened in ours though too, because actually it was the mother that was more, the mother's mother only told one of her sisters out of a family of 8, or everybody on the mother's side.
Big secret.
And the father's mother was much more, I could have shared her very easily, but they had tickets to go to Japan and have an abortion, but because they had to sign papers stating that they might be arrested coming back into the United States, they decided not to do it. That's why, so they got married. The grandmother, her mother hated Rich, didn't want them to get married, but they had already decided even when they got married, they were going to relinquish his child because he just didn't feel the responsibility to raise it. But they loved each other, so it's a whole different type
Yeah,
of thing.
big mess. But when are we going to put the kid first?
We found him, I had lunch with both of them, but that grandmother, it's still,
She still wields the power, huh?
but the mother has tried to break away from her, and still they're very, very close. She had another child, but her husband left her when she got pregnant the second time, a different one, because he didn't want any children. So she ended up moving home with the mother and father.
Oh.
And they have just, that
Closed
girl,
ranks.
it's just, that's their baby. And this other one's their baby too, mine. And so it's hard, but the half-sister is just thrilled that she's got a sister. And
Good.
Nan's doing it, but also it's a grandpa that's a step-grandpa, and he's hard. So there's lots of things.
All these family dynamics, yeah.
I think when my husband and I had told our friends that we were going to adopt an older child and that we were entering into an open adoption, people thought we were crazy.
Yeah.
And I still get comments from people like, well, now you're going to end it, right? You had to agree to it together, but now you're going to end it, right? And 7 years later, you're still going on with all of this, and this can't be healthy for this child. And there's a lot of prejudice against this. There's a lot of, and the first comments that I received was, when a child's removed for cause, how could you agree to still let there be contact between the birth parent, who may be the abusing person, and the child? And I think the people who they need to spend a day with my child to understand that. That's his mom and dad. And if you asked him, way back on the day when he was in the hospital, because of what had happened to him, where he wanted to go from the hospital, he never would have said, please put me up for adoption. He wanted to go home. He wanted to go home. He loves and is loyal to his mom and his family, and he always will be. And so how do you say to somebody, fine, love them and be loyal to them, but when you're 18, we'll make contact, but for the rest of it, forget about it, shut them out, and don't think about this. You cannot do that. If you put your child first, you cannot do that. The other thing is that I think that the fear of what the family is like, and people ask me if I'm afraid they're going to come back and take them. Are they going to come back to your house and ask for him back? Well, there's her days, hanging out.
Please.
But no, I don't have that fear. It wasn't a decision that his mom came to because she was mad one day and decided she didn't want to see him anymore. I don't know that society doesn't understand that, but society doesn't want it to be that way. I see American society as wanting there to be a bad guy in adoption. And the bad guy has to be either the birth mother or the adoptive mother. But one of them, in American society, one of us has to be the bad guy. Because if you do it the other way, you have to look at the pain. And we never, in America, we don't deal with pain. No, we don't do it. We don't deal with feelings at all, but especially if we do deal with a feeling, it's not going to be pain or sorrow. So, yeah, we don't do that thing very well. So we can't. So we have to make a bad guy, and that's the sad thing that we need to overcome. It's going to take a little while, but I think we can do it. And unfortunately, what society does not understand is that they have made the adoptee feel like the bad guy. They may be blaming the birth mother, they may be blaming the adoptive parents, but the person who feels bad and to blame is the adoptee. So
Yeah. I really believe too that that the idea of waiting till you're 18, that's probably one of the worst times in anybody's life that you really need to do this.
28 maybe.
Well, no, I think that really, as Jean Payton says, adoptees should meet their birth family before they enter into adolescence, before they get into this Schmidt.
My daughter is 8, almost 8, and I think she's ready now.
I do too. I was ready at 8. I knew
Sure.
that at
Yeah.
8.
Let's get rid of this hook, this adoption hook on which we can hang all of our
Well,
troubles.
if
Adoption
these
is
children
the worst child abuse I've ever seen.
with knowing that they don't have that their cognitive development, their emotional development, and their social development does not equal their chronological development, and knowing that and accepting that factor, we can't put a date on a time when it's okay to know your history. You kind of have to grow up knowing your history because you don't know. You don't know when a child needs to know. I don't know when I'm going to need a Band-Aid because I'm going to bleed. I cannot anticipate that I'm not allowed to have a wound big enough for 2 Band-Aids until I'm 7. I have to. It has to be there all along. And then people have to use their discretion as with anything else as to, sometimes we tell children everything because we think that's what they want to know, when really all they wanted to know was...
The old, where do I come from?
Where did I come
New Jersey.
from? New Jersey, yeah, right. You told them the whole story of birth. I just wanted to know what town I was born in, Mom. So there's things like, and to know, I think that to know the rewards come differently, the claiming comes differently, things come differently, it never comes the way you think you're going to, and to be able to appreciate the process, people will have an easier time. That's where I think this goes.
And at the end, you have a family that truly has chosen itself.
Yeah.
And they choose to stick together, and they choose to be family, which birth families can't always see. Who was it said when home is where when you go there, they have to take you in.
Yeah.
And some birth families tend to be that way. You do have to take them in because they're blood. But in the adoptive family, truly, they do choose to continue to be family. I think we have a lot of adoptive families, maybe not a lot, but we have a lot more adoptive families that aren't truly families than anybody has ever counted. We have the little boys who are sent away to military academy. We have the families that are really dysfunctional. And we have adoptees who are living with these people that they call, my foster parents or whatever sometimes.
They were given or taken to fulfill a need, and nobody can fulfill a need.
Right. We also have adoptees who aren't allowed to grow up because mom and dad aren't ready to get, it was so hard to get that role that they're not ready to let go of it. Like I told about the lady who called me up because Truth Seekers had called her son in behalf of his birth mother. He was 23 and he was at graduate school. And I had this irate woman on the phone yelling and screaming that we had now destroyed her family. Her family had now ceased to exist because the birth mother was a real person, and this had all changed everything, and she was so irate that she had, and upset that she had called her son's pediatrician, which is where I lost it. I said, you called her pediatrician, he's 23.
I was talking before the committees, and he was talking against open adoption, and I'm talking for. And he says, what does the gene look like? That is a family. Nobody has the right to come in and disrupt my family. And I told him, I said, if you wanted a child of your own, you should have had one. That child is not your own.
not just
He was
yours.
just, I mean, we were just standing there fighting.
That's it. It's people who have not resolved their infertility get like that. And I think that people who have not resolved their infertility should not be allowed to enter into
Adoption.
pre-adoption, if you want to call it that. That is an issue that needs to be dealt with before, because you don't take a child to replace the child that you should have had. in the first
No.
place. That child will never live up to what you thought.
You don't even bear a child to replace one who's deceased.
One dies and they say, well, just have another one.
Right, you never can.
But still, you can give a child up for adoption and they'll say, oh, you don't have more.
And children are disposable.
Well,
They're not-
where is the
They're not
purpose
returnable.
there?
We should stamp them. They're not returnable, you know?
And they're not generic. I'm trying to return this thing off here.
Would either one of you adopt again?
Well, I just did.
Third one, you mean?
No,
Or the second?
the second one we just finalized.
I think this is stopped.